Welcome back. Today we'll discuss the question, did the apostles hallucinate the resurrection of Jesus? The hallucination hypothesis in the past couple of centuries has been one of the biggest proponents to Jesus' resurrection. This argument was somewhat put together by David Strauss in the 1800s, and many modern-day scholars such as Bart Ehrman and Gerd Ludemann have used this view as well. For example, Bart Ehrman says this: the disciples' belief in the resurrection was based on visionary experiences. I should stress it was visions and nothing else that led to the first disciples to believe in the resurrection. In simple terms, the hallucination hypothesis says this: due to the grief the disciples of Jesus experienced after his terrible crucifixion, one of them, and maybe more, experienced some type of visual hallucination of Jesus and believed it to be him resurrected from the dead. Now keep in mind, there are different variations of the hallucination hypothesis. I will simply be tackling the basic idea of it. In this video, I will go over some basic arguments to show why this view doesn't hold up historically with the accounts we have and even psychologically. The first piece of data we need to assess is the likelihood of a person or group of people witnessing visual or sensory hallucinations. From the studies done, the elderly are the most common to experience bereavement hallucinations, or hallucinations of a deceased person. Of course, the disciples were not elderly when the death of Jesus occurred. This is supported by the fact that the students of rabbis are generally younger, and as well we have records of disciples living into the 60s AD, with the Apostle John potentially even living into the 90s AD. One of the most rare hallucinations is that of tactile hallucinations, or when the person is able to touch the deceased person they are hallucinating. Some studies have this as low as only 2% of people experiencing this. This would be the type of hallucinations shown in the Gospels. For example, Mary Magdalene and other women are seen touching Jesus, and then later the disciples as well gave Jesus food to eat. The rarity of a group visual hallucination is almost impossible. But now imagine a tactile or touch-based hallucination with a group. It's almost in a logical position on the accounts we have of his resurrection. One would have to speculate outside of the New Testament accounts to hold this view. The creed we find in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 3 to 7 is a perfect example of why the hallucination hypothesis doesn't work in group scenarios. 1 Corinthians was written by Paul in around 55 AD. Almost the majority of scholars say that the creed Paul uses stems from the Jerusalem Christian community, from the years 30 to 35 AD. So Paul quotes a creed which comes from the same year, if not a couple of years after Jesus' crucifixion. The creed itself goes as such: for I handed on to you as of first importance what I in turn had received, that Christ died for our sins in accordance with the Scriptures, and that he was buried, and that he was raised on the third day in accordance with the Scriptures, and that he appeared to Cephas, then the 12, then he appeared to more than 500 brothers and sisters at one time, most of whom are still alive, though some have died. Then he appeared to James, then to all the apostles. Whether or not the 500 people is an exaggerated number doesn't matter. The fact that we have a creed which states that Jesus appeared to over 12 people, and as well the gospel accounts, which are a separate source which say the same thing, is a breathtaking fact for any historical scholar. This shows the hallucination hypothesis is almost impossible based on the accounts we have, as psychologists agree shared or group hallucinations have never been documented and are nearly impossible. Another thing to keep in mind, the hallucination hypothesis doesn't explain Paul's conversion. Paul had no reason to have grief over the death of Jesus. In fact, you could even argue the opposite. Paul is known for persecuting and even killing Christians himself, as he held much disdain for their beliefs. Based on this, there's no reason for Paul to hallucinate Jesus' apparition. Another problem with the hallucination hypothesis is that it doesn't explain the empty tomb. Roman or Jewish officials could have easily shown the body of Jesus to people, and this whole Christian sect would have just died out. As well, scholars who use the hallucination hypothesis then have to speculate outside of the New Testament accounts to try to argue whatever happened to Jesus' body. To conclude all of this evidence, it is clear the hallucination hypothesis doesn't hold up against the accounts and evidence we have. The rarity of a group hallucination in the field of psychology is unimaginable, so much so that it's nearly impossible for it to happen, especially when it's 12 or more people. Finally, hallucination hypothesis as well leaves open the question of why there was an empty tomb. The importance of the resurrection of Jesus cannot be overstated. Paul says this best in 1 Corinthians when he says, "And if Christ has not been raised, then our proclamation has been in vain, and your faith has been in vain." Thank you for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed this more academic video. If you liked it, please like and subscribe, and as always, God bless.